I want to see the Liberians, and I want to see them because they have been through so much. And had it been in another place, another set of people, maybe there wouldn't be that resolve and that level of accomplishment at the end of the day. And so I'm looking forward to just see how people have gotten their lives back together, how they have, I'm looking forward to see the people who have chosen to not dwell so much on the past and all the negatives that were in the past, but who have chosen to move on, especially for the sake of their children. I'm looking forward to see them more than anything else.
I always thought of Africa, I had the perception of Africa as this very mysterious place.
The first time I think I ever heard about Africa was as a child. I'm an older student, and I can remember watching concerts like Live Aid and all those kinds of things, where those are specific fundraisers for victims of famine. I think that my first germ of specific interest working in Africa was probably around 2000, between 2003 and 2005. I started volunteering with the organization One. And from that, additional interest came, and I used a couple contacts to hook up with and be able to volunteer with Millennium Promise. And I worked with Dr. Sachs and his wife on a project in Malawi.
Most images of Africa, I think, in America are of poverty, disease, sometimes violence with wars. And so certainly up until college, that was mostly the interactions that I had with the continent. In college, though, I took African politics courses, and I had a professor, Peggy, who was from Nigeria, and she explained the context of the poverty and the context of the violence and the chaos and sort of what came before, and learned about colonialism, and that really helped me understand why the continent is the way it is today.
My interest in Africa began first when I was learning American history as a child, and I spent a lot of time reading historical fiction that was based from the perspective of children especially, or young adults, and being able to understand the issues that children growing up in slavery or post-slavery faced started to make me to think about, to challenge myself on the human condition and what we all share as people, and whether something is happening to someone who is not from your geographic area or not has no weight in how much their equal treatment and they're having a happy and prosperous and resource-filled life, how important that is. So beginning with that American history early on, these wheels started to turn. And then as I began to study political science at both in Charleston and Wayne State, I was very drawn to civil rights specifically. And the way that America and Africa's history has intertwined has been the main meat of a lot of civil rights movement in our nation's history. And women's rights also fascinates me, but the fact that people have been drawn to treat people the way that they have based on their background and based on their color is just so irrelevant to my own view of where we as a future can get to. And so I think when we are trying to look at being progressive, we always have to look at our past and how things have shifted the way they have and who came into what position they did and why that story is what it is, and not just saying, we're here, what are we going to do about it, why did we get here? And so Africa is very much a part of this nation's history and of this city that is my home's history as well.
I'm interested in, in the United States, we've had democracy for 200 plus years. So we've seen the evolution, but we're most familiar with the most recent, how we carry democracy. But to me, the most interesting part is to see what it's like for a new democracy, what kind of changes it creates in a nation, what benefits it brings to the people, if any. I guess the biggest question, is it worth the fight?
Democracy to me would be equality and having the ability of equal access to whether it's political or educational access or healthcare access or pretty much just equal rights for everyone. And
My ideas about democracy directly relate to the comparative politics coursework I've had. So when I would talk to you about democracy, I would tell you that the most basic definition of democracy is free, fair, and regular elections. And that's the benchmark by which we can really measure all countries, utilizing the same measurement. I would also tell you, however, that broader definitions of democracy include many concepts in addition to just free, fair, and regular elections. When you talk about equal access to voting, okay, suffrage for everyone. You talk about things like protections and civil liberties. So definition of democracy definitely goes beyond voting, but that is one of the major aspects that we look at and we study.
I think that multiple parties and multiple candidates for presidency is very important in many democracies. In the United States, we've had a little bit different, but I mean, we still have those third parties, so it's definitely evident that it's important. And for Liberia, it's even more important because they're such a new country. It's important that more people get onto the scene, get their views out there, their ideas. And it makes for, there's a lot more compromises to be made, political platforms to be built, and more objectives to be added to the list of things that need to be done. So it definitely exposes more people to more things. And with more parties, there's always someone that's going to be able to rise up and gain that majority, or they'll be able to better satisfy the citizens' needs. And that's always something that everyone's going to have to take into account in a multiple party system. So they're going to have to always react to make the people happy. And by making the people happy, you don't become a dictator. You actually represent them better.
You can't just group the entire continent as one whole and with one problem or one solution. That you really have to look at each region specifically and figure out.
Yeah, I suppose being raised American, you automatically assume that democracy is the only form of government that makes sense, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. People need to have an expression of their opinions. People need to provide a society that, as a group, they feel like they can be comfortable living in, and no one person, the communists tried this, the Marxists tried this, nobody can dictate what everybody wants. And as a consequence, democracy provides a filter for all this. But I do think that there is a growing and evolutionary process in developing that democracy. They're in the 1800s, the British, when they realized that they had to give the vote to everybody, realized education of everybody was a criteria so people could reasonably vote and have the communication and all. So democracy is, I think, a baseline for civilization and providing the governance and that will give everybody the opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
These are people that are very different from our beliefs. While they still believe in democracy, their democracy is not the same as what we believe in. So everything's always different. There's no two people that are the same, and that's the same for their form of and their thoughts.
I think democracy in Liberia is a particularly fascinating case because of the point at which they are at in their development. They're very young in their development. From the reading I've done, I sense an excitement about the possibilities of democracy within that country. I also think it's an interesting case because of the country's history and its ties to the United States and the similarities in many ways in some of the institutions of government they're attempting to set up and how their government is organized. There are some similarities to the United States, and it may make a very interesting comparison.
Okay, the African Democracy Project for me is an opportunity for me to see people who have basically endured much more than they really should have. It's an opportunity for me to look at, for example, some of the measures that have been put in place after they spent so many years in war. Things like the Truth and Reconciliation that has been proposed in Liberia. Is it really good for these people? Is it the way that they should have actually gone? Or what were the other options? And is the Truth and Reconciliation really finding what or fulfilling its purpose? Is it really carrying out its mandate? or should this have even been the mandate in the first place? And then I also want to be able to look at how democracy has been transitioning in this country. Is it, I mean, we'll be looking at the elections, and then is the democracy actually coming to the realization that it was actually that they actually thought it would actually get to? You know, these are some of the things I want to look at. And then also I want to be able to look at the kind of democracy that is there now, and if it will ever be institutionalized, and if it will ever be something that people can actually celebrate in Liberia.
Well, I'm not sure if democracy is all that desirable for Africa. Right now, we're only witnessing, you know, the initial part of it, the fighting. So we see more of the violence. We see it tearing apart countries and destabilizing them even further. And coming out of that, trying to recover from war is not an easy task. You know, whether your new form of government is democratic or not, it's going to pose a problem.
Not many countries have had a Truth and Reconciliation Council in place that has actually benefited them, you know, so well. I mean, the fact that people have been able to look at some of the very persons who raped them, some of the persons who did them so much harm, and are willing to say, okay, yes, you did this to me, but I forgive you. I mean, that says a whole lot about the Liberian people.
I do think democracy can work in Africa. I think we are seeing the emergence of a few country cases that show us that that is possible. If you think about all the different scholarship that's been done regarding development of democracies, you need to look at a lot of different factors, and a lot of those factors affect countries within Africa. There have been arguments that democracy survives based on level of economic development. There are huge ties to democracy and education levels. So those are things that countries in Africa are probably going to struggle with, but certainly I think it's possible.
I think the reason why democracy can work in Africa, not just Liberia, is because people have the desire for a better way of life than what they've known up until now. And democracy is the only answer for them to be able to achieve that.
Well, looking at Africa today, I see a continent that's in rapid development, has so much more potential. Perhaps in previous centuries it was somewhat landlocked by the lack of proper harbors and transportation, and not a whole lot of opportunity to use its mineral resources and to develop. But looking at the economies and international trade and the development of education, health, all that will make a very vibrant economy, and I won't be surprised in half a century it's the new China. So.
My first impressions once I got into Liberia was that it was very enthusiastic. Everyone is talking, everyone is very kind, lots of horns honking, and everyone's just, it's a lively city here in Monrovia, and it's very nice to see.
I wasn't, you know, even though it was a complete contrast between what I saw at the rally versus what I saw on election day, I wasn't surprised because it was my theory and my notion that, you know, if every single person in Liberia has told me how they would like free, fair, and transparent elections, how they would like peace in the country, that if everyone truly felt that way, then what else would there be? So, you know, and it was, that's exactly what I witnessed. So I wasn't surprised, but I was humbled, and I was really happy to be a part of it.
Based on the activities that I've participated in and the research I've done, I see a country full of people who are very welcoming to us, who are happy to have us here, who are hopeful about their future, who are excited about the opportunity to participate in their national elections. They're passionate about building better futures for themselves, and they understand that that will be done through education and jobs.
They're strengthened. The people of Liberia are just amazing. They're so kind, they're so generous, and they're always willing to give you a few minutes to talk to them, and they really want to explain their stories, their individual stories.
I think it's cultural. I think part of the African culture is more of a communitarian nature, where people care more about each other and try to work together. You don't see a lot of violence here. I know it's a violence-ridden country from the Civil War, but on the street, the average day, you don't see as much violence as you do in even some American communities. I think people are a little bit more on trying to get along together and for their family than they are about, trying to get as much money as they can from someone else. You don't see the same kind of avarice that you have seen in other countries I've been to.
The excitement at the rallies, I feel, translated somewhat to the polls. The rallies were a celebration, to me, is what it felt like. A celebration of the chance to express themselves at the polls. From what I saw on Election Day, the polls were, for the most part, more sedate, more orderly. In the early morning and late at night when there was very, very long lines, there were some cases where the crowd was getting whipped up. But the excitement and the passion in the party was definitely in the rallies before.
The political rallies that the parties had during their campaign period were very high energy. A lot of excitement, dancing, music, a lot of passion, people arguing politics, talking politics, very intense. There was a lot of excitement, and it was great. But when it came time for election,
The level of interest in democracy in this country is something we talked about when we were in the States, but it's really amazing to see, and I think that was the thing that we had studied that was surprising to see here. Just going to the election, the polls yesterday, and watching the people stand in line in pouring rain, waiting to vote, the excitement about it, the fact that it was really a big process for everybody that they were involved in. All the news, the radio has all been about the election. So the interest in democracy has been something that, again, is unique in my experience.
on Election Day, I was able to travel outside of Monrovia. We went to Margibi County and Bong County. So we saw about 4 or 5 different districts. And so this Monrovia is very urban. It's the capital of Liberia, and the districts that we traveled to are very rural. So we got to see a different side of life in Liberia, but attitudes were still very similar.
I think I knew what to expect as far as living conditions of many of the people here. I think there's a difference between seeing pictures and reading figures and statistics and understanding what it's like here. There's a difference between knowing that and seeing it. Seeing the people, seeing their homes, seeing how they live every single day and what they're faced with every day.
The poverty has been surprising. I know I've looked at the HDI, the Human Development Index for Liberia, and I know how very poor it is. It is one of the poorest countries in the world, but still the extent of the poverty is still hard to imagine. If you've never experienced it yourself, which I haven't, it's an amazing experience. So that's been certainly interesting. But then again, the fact that people are still friendly and are still willing to talk, are excited that we're here. I've made some friends. A number of the people, have come up to me and talked to me now because they've seen me several times, which you don't get in our communities, in our cities.
So here we are at the Firestone Plantation, which has been such a major economic element of the country, actually, over a period of time. And on one side is the old Firestone Plantation, if you will, and on the other side they're building the new plantation. And after the war, the current government put into place the concessionary contracts, which basically meant that they went back to the 70 major companies or so in the country and insisted that they reopen the contracts for negotiation. As a result, concessions were required of the different companies, so there would be more rewards to the people who are working in the different industries or the Firestone Plantation, as the case may be. As a consequence, schools are being built, churches are being built, This in essence is very much like the company towns of the 18th and 19th century. And as the economy develops and people are able to save more and develop their own desires as to what they want to buy, where they want to live, what food they want to eat, the company town will probably continue to disappear as it has in so many other parts of the world. But at this point in time, I would have to think that the people in this last 10 years probably find Firestone a good employer.
There have been a number of people that I've talked to that have been key in me understanding what's happening in Liberia, and I thought had an interesting story to tell. At the Unity Party headquarters, I was able to interview two people whose families had been victims during the Civil War and ask them about what they saw for the future of Liberia. One gentleman's 3-year-old daughter was shot while her mother was carrying her on her back, and the child was shot in the stomach and died because there was no medical care for her. It was very difficult to interview that gentleman because although that happened some 10 years ago, it still sticks in his mind. He doesn't have a 13-year-old with him because his daughter died. So he's going to college to get his PhD in information technology in an effort to be able to support the rest of his family. And so that was a touching story. I also am going to, hopefully at 1:30 this afternoon, go to watch an amputees soccer tournament, or soccer practice, I guess it is. And I made contact with one of the gentlemen there who, after he'd lost his leg in the war, had been begging for his family on the side of the road because he couldn't even afford a crutch to walk with to be able to get a job or do anything. And they offered him the chance to be with the soccer team so that he could support his family. So the man's in his 50s and is supporting his family by playing soccer with one leg. I thought that was a really moving story as well.
In the week that I've been in Liberia, I've had the opportunity to see a lot of some of the country and to meet with many people, and my thoughts are that Liberia is still fresh out of its civil war. 2003 was not that long ago. It's only 8 years since the peace accord. But since then, I think that Liberia has come a long way. I wouldn't have believed that a population could be so passionate about democracy, about free, fair, and transparent elections, and could voice their political stance and political opinions so eloquently. The only thing that there's still a lot of development and infrastructural issues, and there's a long way for Liberia to go, but it seems like the will is there, and it's just a question of more time, or a matter of more time.
So I think that the course is a unique experience for students in that they very rarely, even in some of the advanced seminars that we teach, get a chance to really feel like they are able to become specialists in a topic. And many students have come and told me that it's been incredibly refreshing to come in every time we meet and talk about Liberia and try to focus on really deeply understanding one particular case over the entire course of a semester. But I think even if we spent the whole semester with that focus, without the component of getting into the field, it isn't the same at all. I think that in my field of comparative politics, it's extremely important to have the experience of being in the place that you're studying, because the things that you learn from reading about it may appear different on the ground, or you're able to get a deeper understanding of what you're studying when you have the opportunity to actually be there. And frankly, it's sometimes difficult to talk to people from the place that you're studying about the things that you've learned. Say, well, here's what I think I know about your country. Now you tell me if you find that to be true. That can be uncomfortable, but unless you learn how to do that, you can never really, I think, gain knowledge of another experience enough to have that comparison bear fruit.